Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of Biteable, the bite-sized podcast for your brain. I'm Sierra, your host, and today we're going to be talking about marriage. In the last few episodes, I mentioned that I was going to be getting married later on this year to my fiance, Jason. Hi, Jason. And I wanted to talk about that since that's something that is very much on our minds right now as we're planning our wedding and everything and figuring out all the details for that. But I kind of wanted to talk today about, what marriage is, what I feel about it, and sort of, the idea of marriage in and of itself. So I wanted to start off with essentially the dictionary definition of it being marriage, also called matrimony or wedlock, is a culturally and often legalized recognized union between people called spouses. It establishes rights and obligations between them, as well between them and their children, and between them and their in-laws. It's considered cultural universal, but the definition of marriage varies between cultures and religions over time. So I guess the idea of marriage for myself personally is essentially telling the world that you're committed to this other individual and that you're tying your life to theirs and you guys are going to move forward as a unified front against the world. That's like kind of the bare bones of what it means to me to, get married and actually go through the whole process. I didn't really grow up thinking I would get married or have it in my mind as it's this huge thing that like I have to do. And especially being a woman, that's not the case everywhere. I was born and raised in Canada, lived in Ontario pretty much all my life at this point. And I was never really raised thinking of marriage as something that I had to do. My parents were never married. My mom has two other daughters who are older than me, and she was never married until her husband now, who's not any of our fathers. So it's like interesting for me, the idea of marriage, because I didn't grow up with it being something that like, oh, my parents are married. And I know that's not the case everywhere. In a lot of like cultures, it's a lot more significant and important that, you get married and you have children. And it's something that's kind of all over the world, very prevalent in society and everything. And it's such an interesting concept that you're just like, hey, I like you like me. We're going to do this whole future thing together. And it's just such an interesting idea because as much as you can know somebody, you're deciding to, tie yourself to them and have, I guess, if you want to have kids with them. Not every married couple does, but you're making that commitment. And I think that's the part that attracts me to it. Not so much the title of, oh, being a wife or this is my husband. But the idea that you're telling the world, hey, we're in this together through thick and thin, till death do us part and all that. And I think that's just very beautiful. And the idea of having that with someone and making that commitment is something that should be celebrated and commended. And, you should, I think, if you want to get married, you should. And to be able to celebrate that with your family is so beautiful. And hopefully it's not too expensive to do, but it is kind of crazy how much people spend on their weddings. But maybe that's a topic for another time. So getting back to the idea of marriage itself, I guess for me, thinking about like the history of it, I always think about like Western culture, the idea of marriage. Here in North America and Canada. I like when I think of marriage and how it's evolved from back in the day when, Canada was first being settled. It was a different time. You had people getting married at a lot younger of an age. I'm 32. My fiance is 32. And so, we're what some people may say getting married, like not later on in life, but later than normal. I think, at least. He might have a different opinion on that, but especially being like a woman getting married, I think it's something like the idea of marriage is a lot more focused on for women and girls. There's a lot more emphasis put on that to, grow up, marry, have kids. Like those are seen as our societal goals, like a woman's societal goals, where for a man, it's to grow up, get married, and provide for his family. Um, so I think just kind of like the differences in the roles for men and women in marriage are very interesting. And I'd like to know what you guys think. Like, did you grow up with the idea of marriage and like that would be something that you would have to do eventually? Are you for it, against it? What, please comment and like send an email to biteable.to@gmail.com. I'd love to hear like your perspective of this because I grew up in a household where, it was not really something that was a part of like my parents' relationship. They were just kind of together and then they separated. Even though they weren't actually married, they just kind of like broke up and went their separate ways. And so for me, like the idea of being in a relationship and making that commitment to somebody um, is, I think, like a very serious commitment. And it's not something that's to be taken lightly. But I know that, like, in today's society, that's becoming less and less the norm. You don't see as many marriages lasting for as long as they used to. You see an old couple that's been together for like 65 years or something like that, or they were married when they were like 18 or something like that, and that's becoming less and less prevalent in today's society. And I think that's very interesting just because the idea of like online dating has added that different factor where there's so many more people that you would have access to, as opposed to back in the day. It's kind of like, here's your town. There's maybe a few other towns that you would be able to get to within a reasonable amount of time. And that would be like your pool of options. It wasn't like you could, I mean, you could, but to travel further to meet people and potentially like get married was a lot more rare. Whereas nowadays it's kind of like, okay, like, you're on Tinder or Bumble or whatever they are now. And it's like, oh, here's a person in the US, here's a person in Australia or Singapore or something like that. Like your pool of potential love interest is so much more vast now than it used to be. And I think that has maybe led to or contributed to the decline in people wanting to get married, because there's so many more people nowadays, and having a committed relationship with something isn't, or having a committed relationship with somebody, not something, um, is not as common. You don't, or at least I don't, meet couples who are together for, 10, 20 years. Granted, I am only 32, so maybe that's when I get older and make friends or something like that. But like, we, both my fiance and I, don't have friends who have been married for a long time. He has friends that are kind of getting married now. And I mean, there's a one or two that they've been together for like, I think 5 or 6 years. But that's one out of a friend group of, I don't know, 12 couples or something like that. A total of 12 people. So I just think it's like interesting how the idea of marriage has kind of declined. They don't happen as often, and people don't stay together as long as they used to. I'm sure there are statistics for that. Let me look that up. Okay, so I just found this PDF document that you can look up, and I'll provide a link in the description of 20 years of marriages in Canada, and it's from 1972 to 1994. And I mean, it shows that like the expected number of marriages. Oh, okay. The first chart is expected and observed marriages in Canada between that time frame. And I mean, the number of expected was quite high. At the highest, I think it was like 250,000 that they were expecting, but it differed quite a lot. The lowest being like, I think that's 159,000 was the lowest. So quite different from 250,000 being the expected, but they only actually got at the lowest 159. And I mean, all of this is kind of above and beyond what I wanted to get into and go through. If that's something that would be interesting, then let me know in the comments and I can certainly dive deeper into that. But, you know, I think that in today's society, you know, the idea of marriage is not as common, not as many people want to do it, and they're not doing it as early. It's something that, you know, they kind of wait and put off until they're a bit older, more financially stable, mentally, emotionally, you know, being able to not only afford a marriage, because I mean, unless you just go down to City Hall and spend the, like, I think $600 or something like that, most people plan like a relatively large wedding. Ours is going to be about 100 people, and you know, that's not small. It's not as large as some of the ones that I've heard about where it's like, you know, 400 or 500 people. That's, I don't even know if I know that many people, let alone want to pay for that many people. But you know, having the money to front that cost, whether your parents are helping you or not, and then, you know, having a house to raise potential children in or live together, being able to afford a home. House prices in Canada have just skyrocketed since the start of the pandemic. They were expensive before, and now they're even more expensive. So it's a bit ridiculous. And, you know, just being in an emotional state to connect with someone on that level and make that kind of commitment and actually think about, you know, you're going to be spending day after day, you know, week after week, month after month, year after year with that person, and understanding what that means. And I think maybe the biggest deterrence to marriage, in at least my mind, this is my opinion, is not a lot of people are ready for that emotional commitment, especially since, you know, you're able to look at all these Tinder profiles and, you know, websites like Hinge and Match and whatnot. They, I guess, kind of give you the idea that you can have a lot of partners, or that there's so much out there that you can, you know, so many different types of people that you can talk to and have a relationship with or not a relationship with. And so, you know, like being in that mental state to understand and devote yourself to someone is, I think, a lot harder nowadays. People aren't as emotionally stable or cognizant of how they feel. I don't think people look at themselves and, understand who they are and love themselves. I think it's a lot harder to nowadays. Maybe that's just me and like my observations, but, being in a place where you're actually comfortable and happy with who you are allows you to then have the emotional capacity to let somebody else into your life and, you know, devote your time and effort and emotional state to them as well. And you need to be able to do that. If you don't love yourself, if you're not happy with yourself or your situation, you're not going to have time to, bring somebody else and all of their stuff into what you already have going on. It's too much. And that's why I think, people are waiting longer to get married because they're still figuring themselves out. Where back in the old days, that choice was just kind of like made for you through arranged marriage or just the societal norm back in the day. People were getting married a lot younger. And nowadays, people are still dating and figuring themselves out and establishing their careers up until, 30, 35. And so for them to get married at that time, it's like too much going on. So they just wait, they put it off. So people are having or getting married and having kids a lot later in life. And, I kind of wonder what you guys think about that. Is it something that you agree with? Do you think people should wait? I personally do, especially being a little bit older now myself. When my mom had my eldest sister, she was 21 or sorry, no, 23. And I think about being 23 and having a kid and getting married, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what was I even doing? I'm pretty sure I was still clubbing. And yeah, I think I was living downtown in like with one of my sisters, my eldest sister, working at the restaurant, just out of chef school or in my final year, I believe it was. In no way, shape, or form ready for marriage or, kids or anything like that. And, I just think like the idea of people wanting to get married and everything early is, I mean, there's benefits to it. You can, have kids younger. Your body's able to bounce back from that earlier, which I guess would be a benefit. And I mean, that's kind of the only benefit that I can think of. I'd like to hear from you guys. Is there any kind of benefit that maybe I'm not thinking of or that you can comment on that would be a reason to get married earlier? Because like I can't really think of one right now. All I think of is, you have no idea what's going on there. You're still figuring out your life, your emotions, your future, and then add another person's, emotions, life, and future to that. And that just seems like a mess waiting to happen. So, or maybe not, because I mean, there's that, I guess, idea that we all kind of like think of and see older couples walking down the road and you're like, oh, they must have been together for like 50 years or something like that. And that generation got married a lot earlier than we do now. So maybe there's something to be said about that. Let me know your thoughts. Have any of you grown up, in households that had both parents or had your parents married? What about if you didn't? Are you for marriage, against it? What age do you think people should get married at? Or, what's your opinion on getting married in your 20s versus your 30s versus never? So let me know. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys join me next week. This has been Biteable, the bite-sized podcast for your great brain. Make sure that you like and subscribe and comment down below as well. We'll see you next week. Bye.